there's this piece within you, and the human psyche is and the human spirit is so amazing because we're our biggest critics, but we're also our biggest fans. And when we need to, we elevate ourselves to a whole level that we didn't know that we could. Mesmerizing, mind bending, magic making, the artistic contraception of poetry. I dare to conceptualize harmony. I dare to visualize artistry. I dare to build a community. I dare to negate negativity with positivity. And I dare you to do the same.
Suicide is a large and growing public health problem. Suicide rates increased 33% between 1999 and 2019. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and is responsible for nearly 50,000 deaths in 2019, which relates to about 1 every 11 minutes. It's a problem. It's something that riddles this society. And, being nearly the 10th leading cause of death in the US, there needs to be more awareness around it. So with that said, I want to introduce to you today our guest, Patrick Murakami. So Patrick went from depressed and suicidal and lacking any purpose to selling $1 million on Facebook and growing a 6-figure income. In this podcast, we'll learn of his incredible journey of once duct taping his windows to prevent any sliver of light from coming into his room because he was that depressed and that suicidal, to now being a thriving entrepreneur. Patrick leveraged his creative side and to marshal the darkness that once nearly took his life. He's a poet, he's an artist, and you're going to learn all about it on this podcast and really hear his story. And he does something that's called slam poetry, which is pretty cool. You'll see in this podcast, he'll read some poetry of when he was in his darkest moments to what his poetry says today, which is really a true expression of how he's feeling. From his creative side, his background includes working on independent films, major network TV shows such as The Biggest Loser, acting for Spike TV, having poetry published, recording music, and now taking on his entrepreneurial world of business coaching. He's about to launch a podcast. He has a successful business as well in the insurance business. And this guy has gone from being about as low as a human being can be to cutting himself and nearly bleeding to death in a tub to now crushing it in the world. It gives hope to many people out there that may be in a low point. And I'm really excited to have Patrick come on the show and share of his journey. All right, everybody, welcome to the Adapt You podcast. Super stoked to have on the show today with us, Patrick Murakami. Patrick, welcome to the show, man. So good to have you on.
Hey, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm super excited.
So Patrick and I were actually just talking a second ago about his last name, Murakami. I actually had to ask him how to say it. So for the listeners, tell us a little bit about your last name and what it means. I thought it was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, so Murakami it's actually a pretty common last name in Japan. I asked my grandmother one time what it meant, and she basically said it translates to house of wind or descendant of wind. And basically that's in regards to Fujin, which is the wind god. Oftentimes you hear Fujin associated with Raiden. Sometimes I think she told me the story that the people, when they were asking for rain or thunder and wind and all that stuff, they would actually go and bang on the taiko drums to be able to communicate with them directly. So that's my understanding.
Wow. See, that's super cool when you told that story, because I was thinking to myself, my last name being Peterson, it's incredibly boring. It doesn't mean anything about gods or banging on drums or anything kind of sweet like that. It's just, from what I've been told, it's the son of Peter, which I don't even know who that is. So it was actually pretty cool to hear that story. So Patrick, I again, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And what I think we want to spend some time on discussing is sort of your experience and your journey as a suicide survivor. We've never had somebody on the show that has talked to us about this, and is a podcast that's focused on change and going through that process of change and being in incredible pain and sometimes those situations and how we can rise out of that. I know there are people that are listening to this right now that are in the midst of those types of thoughts or have had them before in the past or may have them in the future. So the value you're going to bring today is going to be immense. So what I was hoping you could do is just share a little bit of your story. Talk to us a little bit about, what brought you to that point, and sort of how you got there.
Absolutely. And if it's okay with you, what I'd like to do is maybe just kind of start off to read a poem that I wrote when I was in the midst of maybe the worst of depression and the suicides in between attempts, things like that, just to kind
Please.
of paint a real picture. And then I can go into sharing the story.
Yes, please. That'd be great.
Thank you. My heart is like a pane of shattered glass. All that's left is shadows of bruises and a battered past. I lash out by dealing with the hurt by causing pain. Who's going to clean up the mess, and what do I have to gain? This is real, what I feel deep down inside. I can't let it go, yet it flows all the way to the core because I'm a mess. I'm depressed and my blood runs dry. This is what it must feel like when angels die. Anger, despair, anxiety, depression. Not a single word can describe my confession. Dreams are empty promises and false premonitions. I'm jaded, I'm weary, and I'm full of demolition. This is real. What I feel deep down inside, and I can't let it go, yet it flows all the way to the core because I'm a mess. I'm depressed and my blood runs dry. This is what it feels like when angels die. They say when babies are born, an angel gets its wings. Maybe mine was a scorpion because every time I get something, it stings. My mind is poisoned with negativity. Darkness runs deep in this sepulchral sanctuary. This can't be real. What I feel deep down inside, I want to let it go, yet it flows all the way to the core. So somebody, anybody, clean up the mess. He was depressed, his blood ran dry, and this is what it must feel like when angels die. So
Wow.
I had gone through a really, really ugly divorce. Was with a girl from high school. We had basically we were just kids when we got together, and we were both very broken people, come from broken homes, um, and we basically held hope into each other, right? And again, as a kid, you can only be responsible for so much, but at some point when you turn into an adult, you realize that 100% of everything that's ever happened to you, there's always been one integer, which is yourself. And so at some point, you have to start taking responsibility, not necessarily for the things that happen, but how you respond to them. And I feel like that because we were kids, we were young, we didn't know all those things that were impacting us. We just kind of grew into two different people. And so um, I basically went from what I thought was a one of a kind type relationship where we had only kind of been with each other and all these things to finding out that that was not the case. And then there's so many other questions that came into play, like, man, is this my child? And all these different things. And so it kind of sent me in a downward spiral. And with all of that, like, she ended up leaving. I'm sitting there paying rent in two paychecks, bouncing checks to keep the lights on. I had a roommate who was supposed to move in, and he was there for 3 days and left. So at that point, I was nearly homeless. I mean, I was able to keep the roof on, but I went without TV. I went without internet. I went out with electricity. At one point, I had candles on in the home, to be able to do that. Found out if you have even $1 in your checking account, you can buy a tank of gas if you run it through as debit. Obviously, you're going to pay for it on the back end. And then the biggest piece, and probably the piece that sticks out to me the most, is I remember having to buy bags of potatoes to be able to ration that for months at a time. So I would buy a bag, every single combination and any single thing of condiment that you can think of. I've probably had it. So it mustard, ketchup, steak sauce, Italian dressing, Cholula packet, salt, pepper, even sugar, anything to change up that bland taste of a potato. But I kind of look back now, and every once in a while I do go get like a craving for just like a really big baked potato or a baked potato bar. But it's kind of a reminder, and it kind of takes me back to remember where I came from. And when you think about somebody's story, right? When you think about where people come from, you just never truly know. And so on the surface, a lot of my friends didn't know, but I had a few who had that great intuition where they could tell I wasn't eating, they could tell I wasn't sleeping. I would wake up um, and I would just open up the door and then there would be like supplies of water on my doorstep. No note, no nothing. And so it's crazy to think that even when I did not want to push through, when I did not want to see the light of day, other people felt that I was worth it. And when you think about that, it almost, you feel guilty, right? Because one, I couldn't even complete the task of killing myself, right? And that's a whole different type of shame because you couldn't even complete the one thing that you focused on, and to get into that mindset of thinking that way. So that's a like a whole different type of low versus where I was already at. But when in retrospect, I look back and like it gives me a huge appreciation. So I feel like I can experience a whole different type of high that other people are. And I'm not recommending that. I'm not condoning that by any means. It's just the way that I feel about through the experiences I've gone through.
So it's an incredible journey. And I can see anyone being in your position going through and listening to your story, listening to that poem, understanding the clear pain that was there. Obviously, you mentioned coming from mutual broken families. There's a lot behind that naturally, which leads into this, not just the breakup, right? The breakup is just sounds like maybe the straw that broke the camel's back. And so as you went through this process and you continued that downward spiral as you discussed, and you started things just sort of compounded on top of each other, how close did you get?
I got too close. I one time I overdosed with like an entire bottle of Tylenol, probably 250 tablets, and I
Wow.
spent 6 days puking my guts out, having to get my stomach pumped. Another time, basically, I had basically made incisions right into the skin, and the scars are still there 12 years later. And so when you're laying there and the paramedics are there carrying you in and they're stitching you, kind of, preventing the bleeding and things like that. Um, and I had a 3-year-old son, you know, while I was doing all this stuff. I was kind of pre-planning a lot of these things, right? I thought, man, maybe I just crashed my car on the highway. So it looks like an accident so he could get paid out on life insurance. I had kind of some cryptic messages to people that says, hey, should something happen, can you make sure that you're there for my kid, right? Or, here's a list of things that I want you to distribute out to, I want you to keep this, right? And it's so then people start getting really worried and
Getting
concerned.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when you look at that, I mean, I don't know, at least 3 times from self-affliction, did I end up basically being hospitalized and having to get care. And it's only literally by the grace of God, really, that somebody had found me during those times. I had one basically where a neighbor heard my dog barking nonstop, and she came over and basically knocked on the door, and the door was unlocked, and that's how she found me and ended up calling the paramedics.
Wow.
The other time was basically I thought I had gone too far, and it kind of freaked me out, which was the last time. Um, and ended up basically going to the paramedics and them kind of, preventing me from bleeding out essentially. And so it was that was, I think, probably the biggest and the pivotal turning point, realizing that, like, man, I'm sad, but I deep down, I don't want to die.
Yeah. You caught yourself that time.
Yes. But it's kind of one of those things where it could have been too late, or maybe, there's this peace within you, and the human psyche is, and the human spirit is so amazing because we're our biggest critics, but we're also our biggest fans. And when we need to, we elevate ourselves to a whole level that we didn't know that we could. And so then when you get there, you're like, why is this not happening all the time?
Yeah. So I want to dive a little deeper and only for the purposes of those who are listening to have a full understanding of how you were feeling. So if at any time they were feeling that way, they could relate and understand, or maybe remember this moment, this podcast. And the reason I've had family members make attempts in the past, thankfully not successfully, and I've never been able to really discuss it with them. There was always just that they didn't want to discuss it. Shame, whatever the reason was, and maybe part of it was I didn't really want to dig because I was a little upset and annoyed by it myself, right? Because I think the knee jerk reaction from those around you are some people it's, oh, thank God you're okay, and some people are pissed off, right? Like,
Yes.
what are you doing? You have a kid. Like, what's wrong with you? You're selfish. Those types of things,
Yeah.
and which we'll dive into. So when you're at that moment, right, where it's the knife's in your hand or the pills are in your hand, like what are you feeling at that point? Is it almost like is it should I do this? Should I not do this? Or is it, gosh, I can't wait this until this is over? Or is this going to hurt? Like, what's going through your mind at that point? Because I'm just trying to understand what gets people to take that step. I understand the pain is there, but those last moments before the action actually occurs.
Yeah, having talked with other people who have gone through similar situations, I feel like that for people it's different, in the experience and kind of the thought process. But for me, I was pretty much just kind of so numb to everything. Um, every morning I wake up and I open this curtain behind me.
Mm-hmm.
But then I wanted no sunlight whatsoever. So I darkened the rooms. I duct tape every single piece of stuff where light was coming in. I would bury myself under blankets. I would allow myself to get to the point where I was shivering almost in hopes that I would just kind of fall asleep and then never wake up. I mean, there's so many different elements and thoughts. It was, man, when we see people like on social media, right, and you talk and they're showing their relationships and they're happy, and I'm like, oh, that's not gonna last, right? Or I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, like finding somebody who has really good energy, good vibes, and they're like, yeah, you're too damn happy, get away from me. And it was kind of one of those things where it's just like literally everything that talked about anything of like being able to move forward, I felt like that I was entrapped and I couldn't move. So anything beyond darkness was never in sight. So if there was any sort of light, it didn't belong where I was at, nor did I want it to be around me. And it took a long time. Like I was going to therapy 3 times a week, and when your psychiatrist is basically saying like, oh, I think I need to get you committed, and then all these things. And then you're like, oh no, I'm getting better, I promise, right? And you're making these empty promises just so that way you could go back home to being in the darkness, and then I start
Mm-hmm.
missing those things, and I start, missing like little things like responding to text messages and phone calls and lashing out to people who are trying to care for you, because you're like, it doesn't matter. It's easier for you to just walk away and for me to push everything out so that way nobody misses me, so that way nobody cares, so that way I'm just forgotten. And that's really, I just wanted to basically dissipate into oblivion so that way nobody would remember me. Nobody could shed a tear for me because I wanted basically nothing. And I wanted to be absolutely nothing because I felt like absolutely nothing.
So as you sort of slip into that darkness, it's almost as if darkness becomes comfortable.
Absolutely. So the poem that I shared, uh, I'll read one kind of at the end of our podcast today to show you where I'm at now. And it's weird because I could not, for a long time, I could not break away from this darkness. It was almost my muse.
Mm-hmm.
And now if I try to kind of touch base in that, it's really hard for me to kind of write in that because I'm on the opposite spectrum now. And it's kind of like, if you have a prism, right? If it
Hmm.
sits there in a dark room, in complete darkness, it really doesn't do anything. But even the slightest of lights allows it to kind of bounce through and shine and kind of refract and redirect light elsewhere. And so, now it's that was kind of one of the things that I resonated with a lot, because I felt like that I was that darkness is what I felt like. But turning around now, I feel like that I was actually the prism that just was refracting that light into places that I didn't know. And then the more I refract, the more I see things illuminate.
That's a great analogy, and I think that helps people kind of understand where you were, and how that darkness becomes comfortable. I think it's pretty common, not just with, I think, with those who have suicidal thoughts, but those who, I mean, the reality is we have 60,000 thoughts a day. It's been estimated as, and tomorrow we'll have pretty much 90%, 95% of the same 60,000 thoughts as the day before, because it becomes normalcy. It becomes pre-programmed. It becomes part of who we are. It starts as a mood, then becomes more of a rut, and then a rut becomes your personality, right? And that's just who you become, right? And it's so hard to reverse that, especially when you slip in such a realm of darkness and you're duct taping the windows and shutting the blinds, and, like you said, lashing out for those who are trying to help you. And I could see that spiral. I would imagine, almost snowballs, and it builds a head of steam. So take us to that moment where I think you mentioned you had cut yourself, and you had made, you kind of came to the realization, like, wait, I don't want to die. And you sought out help at that point. I don't know if that was the turning point, but here you are at rock bottom. Um, and here you are today, blinds wide open, sunshine coming in. You're on a podcast, clearly not in the darkness. Like, walk us through the journey of how you got out of this. And please share in great length, how easy or hard that was.
Yeah.
You
So
said 12, you said 12 years ago, right? Just to clarify.
yeah. So the just like any process, right? Thoughts become actions, actions become habits, habits become lifestyle. So for me, what I realized is, over the course of like 3 years is what it took to really kind of build into that. And then by 4 and 5 is kind of really when I was self-harming myself. The cutting was something that um, it wasn't natural to me, because um, I've physical pain from like sores and aches I could deal with, but cuts and things like that, sight of blood was never really something for me. And so to go from that to kind of like sitting in the bathtub, right, and just kind of like cutting myself from time to time, even taking my finger, kind of writing cryptic messages to myself, right, and from things like that, to then actually attempting to cut. So I actually cut right on the back of the knee, and actually, um, thank goodness that I never took any sort of like classes in regards to knowing where veins and arteries and all those things were, because a quarter of an inch I missed. And
Missed
but the the artery
um,
back there.
the big artery back there. Yeah.
Yes, yep. So but the incision was so bad that they basically had to start wrapping me up at the house before they would move me into to start transporting me to the hospital. 45 stitches is what
Oh,
it
wow.
took to be able to put that back and everything. And um, I was basically laid up for 2 days, just replacing the blood loss. And what was crazy about that is, as I made that cut, and I didn't realize how big that I had made it, but I had a moment basically where I saw kind of all the things that I could appreciate. We just talked about all the things that was kind of like everything that was thrown at me was there, but I saw images of my son growing up. I saw myself on a stage. I saw myself sharing poetry, things that I've written that I've always kind of kept hidden. I saw, you know, me actually kind of in a happy light for just a brief second. And then I kind of heard a thought that basically just said, I'm not done with you yet. And so as I was laying in the hospital recovering, I was thinking, replaying those words in my mind, I'm not done with you yet. And I got really scared, because at that point, I mean, like, what else do I have to go through? I mean, what you've shown me so far hasn't been great, you know? So moving forward, like, God, what kind of purpose do you have? And, and then somebody had kind of like shared with me, they're like, you survived this for a reason. Think of all the great people through history, through the Bible, that have gone on to do great things. Have they not suffered the most? And it kind of like smacked me in the face. I think I spent, a good 45 minutes kind of bawling my eyes out, realizing that I had been selfish and that there was maybe a bigger purpose. And so as I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I go from this selfish, unpurposed person, and I say selfish in the wrong connotation. I believe that there is a certain time and place to be selfish. Like for example, you can't be in abundance to help others, or you can't help others unless you're in abundance first. So you have to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you're selfish and taking care of your bills and all those things before you can help other people, and that's a good selfish. But this was the wrong type of selfish, and so I started just kind of getting back into trying, and I hate this term, but that fake it till you make it, right? Because I feel like that's a horrible term and a horrible thing to do. But for me, that's what I had to do to kind of get back into being a human being, right? Being able
It's
to,
priming, you're
yeah,
priming yourself basically, right?
yeah, exactly, and everything is kind of like onions, so you're just kind of peeling back the layers. So this was a huge step to be able to say, okay, I now know that I don't want to die. I don't want to kill myself, and that maybe I can give things a try. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this purpose was, what this void was. Where is it that I'm supposed to be? So I tried everything. And it was weird, right? From being cooped up in a house to basically going out there on film, working on independent film, being out there acting for Spike TV because they had opened up a new office here, um, being on set for The Biggest Loser, 16 and Pregnant, helping on the film crew, all these different things, recording poetry and actually sharing that with people, getting it published, recording a song, again, and this didn't just happen immediately. It wasn't like all within months. This is over the course of years, you know, um, was able to get back into the workforce because I was kind of like out for a year on disability, with all the mental health stuff. And then I started realizing that like other people were out there who are also suffering in silence. And so by allowing me or allowing myself to be able to speak and share what happened, of course, there's like this mark of shame because that's taboo and people are going to judge. And, but I started slowly with a few people here and there being able to share what happened. People would ask, and just get it's easier and easier the more that you tell it, because you realize then that you're not the only one going through it, right? And then there's certain people where you're like, hey, I'm not talking to that person because that person's going to make me feel like crap, so I'm going to the next person where I know that at least I can get a hug out of it, right? And so you
Yep.
kind of pick and choose. But then I realized that my story, you nobody's going to tell it better than me, and I'm not going to like the variation that other people tell,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I realized 85% of the judgment comes from self. So if I remove that, people may still judge, but nobody's going to judge me as hard as I am.
Mm-hmm.
So it became easier to share bits and pieces. It became easier to kind of write and post about that. It became easier to be an advocate and basically just say, hey, if you've gone through it, or if you're going through some tough times, I just went through it. This is kind of what I've done, right? Um, Realizing that there are so many more resources, especially now in today's world, right? Whether it's a veteran going through PTSD, people through
Mm-hmm.
mental health, we have so many more resources now. But for some reason, overall, it still feels a little bit taboo, um, almost like you're going to catch what I have, right? You're going to catch suicidal tendencies by
It's
hanging around
contagious.
me,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that it's not so much that I mean, part of it is that people are kind of afraid because they've never experienced it and they think that if they learn more that they may experience some of those things or that they may uncover stuff. But part of it is also that life is just so difficult sometimes. And so when you're in the midst of going through your own personal hells, it's really, really hard to take on somebody else's, right? And so there's a saying that I use in one of my businesses, and it's basically for every new level, there's a new devil. And so wherever you're at, whatever you're going through, there's always going to be kind of this fluctuation of goods and highs and lows. And it's kind of, what are you allowing? What are you willing to allow yourself to experience? And so for me, I look back on that and I'm like, the lowest of lows is maybe an experience that maybe many people won't, but does that discredit the things that they go through? Absolutely not. It just it allows me to kind of share my journey a little bit more to understand that like I can go from that to where I'm at now. So I promise you that if I can, you can too, because by no means am I the most resilient, the most extraordinary person. I am a creative, but also at the same time, I'm a little bit of an empath because I get my energy from other people. And part of me of what I do is also kind of maybe making up for that lost time of not fulfilling that because I was maybe hurting not only myself, but pushing so many people who cared for me away as well.
That is just the story of how you sort of come out of this the suicidal recovery phase. It's incredible, and a couple things sort of jump out at me, and that is one thing in particular, that moment when you said you were bleeding, and you had this vision. And what it sounds like is completely different than anything else that maybe you've seen before, which is you saw a future.
Yes.
You saw visions of the future. You saw hope and opportunity, which I know a lot of times for those who are in a very depressive state, it's hard for them to have a vision of the future, and that's a big challenge, right? That's why I think COVID has been so difficult for so many, because it put blinkers on them and how the world is going to look going forward, and they paint it with a negative picture. But you had that moment where, for whatever reason, whatever forces were at play, your internal subconscious, whoever it was, whatever it was, kind of lifted you out of that in that moment, which is an amazing story. And then from there, you went to the hospital, you relived it. That's incredible that happened to you. And I would imagine as you went on your journey, you sought that out naturally, right? That became, as you said, that prism, that new light that you were chasing. And then sounds like from there, like you said the words, you were a creative, very obvious to me as a poet, somebody that's acted and worked in television. Tapping into your creativity, has that been a real, because it seems to me that's who you are. Has that really helped you sort of come into the light more by tapping into your creativity?
Absolutely. I think writing really in so many levels outside of just the fact of I like to write. I grew up and I really love rap and hip hop music. So being able to utilize a lot of those pieces in as part of my writing really helped give me kind of a voice within, right? And a lot of times, I mean, it was a weird journey because it was writing my thoughts and feelings and journaling, from, to having a friend who got me kind of into that film industry to say, hey, here's just kind of some sonnets that I've written. He's like, I'm never going to do anything with it, but I think that, and again, it was so obscure, but it painted a perfect picture to me as to kind of what summer should look like. And from that, it was just kind of like, man, even in his darkness, he's able to find, the ability to kind of write some positive things. And so it got to the point where I was like writing nonstop, whether it was poetry, whether it was thoughts and feelings, emotions, sonnets, lyrics, to short stories, to creative stories, to scripts for movies and TV shows and episodes and all these things, creating characters. And it almost got obsessed for a while. I joined kind of the poetry scene, a lot of slam poetry, and I really was like, man, this is so everything that I wanted. It's got competition, it's got hip hop elements, all these things. But then I realized that, like, I was writing for other people.
Mm.
And a lot of it was very cool. Like I was proud of a lot of the stuff that I wrote, but it really wasn't who I was. I wasn't really sharing the pieces of me. I kept those things hidden. I had a journal essentially of like 2,700 pieces that I had written in the course of 3 years.
Wow.
Went to upgrade my phone, didn't realize that the app had not had been discontinued,
Oh.
deleted everything, and I lost it all. And it really hurt, broke my heart for a little while, but it also gave me an understanding that like that's your old life.
Mm.
Those thoughts and feelings, those are no longer who you are. And so I started writing again. I created a blog online, and I don't actively write in there anymore. But a lot of the pieces I have probably, I think I have like maybe 70 to 100 pieces that are on multiple blogs, but I have probably 1,500 drafts that have been unreleased. And not, I don't wouldn't say that I'm done with them, but it's just
Hmm.
not in the plans right now. But eventually, I would like to start releasing some of these memoirs and some of these books of that are themed based off of different elements, and that definitely helped shape and give me the voice. I then started live streaming on Twitch for a number of years, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Twitch, it's a live stream site mostly for gamers. There's a lot of
Hmm.
creatives and artists now who are starting to come out, a lot of great ones. I've met so many awesome people through that. And when I first got on there, it was just kind of like me and my friends playing Madden, and we would kind of
Yeah.
go in there and just we played Ultimate Team, so it was just kind of like opening up the pack so we could kind of see what we got. But then it evolved. I basically one day just kind of hosted an open mic, and essentially it was just me by myself reading poetry. Had one guy kind of stop by, and he was like, "Are you doing an open mic?" I was like, "Yes." I was like, "I'm reading poetry," and he's like, "Can I share something with you?" Sent me this video. I played it and watched it, completely enamored and mesmerized by it. Turns out this guy's like a 5-time world haiku champion.
Oh, wow.
And basically, he was like, "Hey, I'd love for you to come check out my channel." Right. And again, I'm new. So most of the time when, people just try to come in and kind of self advertise. But I went into his channel that evening and I'm watching him draw, and he basically just said, "Hey, I met this awesome poet today. You guys got to check him out." And he's like, "This is your first time on my channel. I just need you to list 3 things. Tell me your favorite element, tell me your favorite animal, and tell me something about you." And then he's literally drawing these things in watercolor, right? And he's
Oh, wow.
creating these creatures out of your stuff, right? And he's like, "Why don't you just come on and share some poetry?" And I'm like, "What?" So I get into this voice channel with him. I'm sharing poetry, and then this basically over the next 2.5 years became a big portion of my life, where I was streaming 5 to 6 days a week.
Oh,
Every
wow.
Sunday night, I was hosting this digital open mic, and we would have anywhere between 15 to 250 people show up every single Sunday who wanted to be immersed in the arts. And what I didn't realize is that what we were building was a safe space for people who wanted to be inspired by art, people who wanted to share their art. We had artists who had never shared their writings before. We had people who hadn't written in 15 years who felt compelled to come in and share. We had people who, um, you know, who'd never, who've always thought of maybe having this idea of maybe an art gallery, but were too afraid. So this gave them the opportunity. And so to utilize all of that, I didn't realize what we had built. I've been removed from Twitch really from about 3 years now. Um, People were still up to last week kind of asking me like, "Hey man, can you come in even for like one night, even for an hour, even for a half hour?" We just miss that. We used to call it art inspiration.
It's awesome.
And as of last week, I basically just kind of had to officially close it down. It wasn't fair for me to have one foot in the community, one foot in doing all of these other things. And I basically kind of closed that chapter, started focusing more on getting into other platforms such as Instagram. Clubhouse now has been phenomenal for me, and to see all these same people, basically my tribe, follow me over to all of these different areas. So I shut down Twitch, but now they're following me, and they're every time I go live on Instagram, they show up, on Clubhouse. They're trying to get into the same groups, reconnecting with my poetry mentor, from Twitch now on Clubhouse. So it's been a really really big portion of my life. And for me, it's always kind of like, well, how do I integrate that in the day to day?
Mm-hmm.
So when I launched my first business 20 months ago, I utilized basically the things that I had learned on Twitch, how to build a platform, how to build a safe space, how to build a tribe, and use that to build a business. And within 16 months, we sold $1 million worth of sales.
And what is that business?
So I have multiple now, but the first one was an insurance agency. So I've been
Mm-hmm.
in insurance since I was like pretty much all of my adult life, really. Since I was 20 years old, I'd always kind of worked through the call centers in the sales environment. And when I fired my boss, essentially, I had no marketing skills. I'd never done even a 30-second elevator pitch. But I did always kind of have this little anti-corporate feel growing up. And not so much that like I hate corporations. I just, having worked for them for so long, I just feel like that they continue to stack responsibility but not pay.
Of
And
course.
so and I get it. Like, I'm not hating on anybody that is content working a 9 to 5. It's much needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am almost jealous in some ways that, life would be so much easier if I could think that way and just be content. But my life and my journey has shown me otherwise.
It's not who you are. I get it. I'm
Yes.
same. I'm same way. Yeah,
Yes.
business owner as well. And I did the corporate gig, and not for me.
Yeah.
Working for the
So,
man, as they say, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. And it used to be like that saying, like, oh, how's it going? Like, oh, living the dream. And I'm like, whose dream? Because that's not my dream, you know?
Exactly. Yes. Well said.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, $1 million in a year and a half is pretty aggressive, pretty fast most of the time. Usually 3 years has been considered a really quick acceleration, and usually between 4 to 5 years is where most people are finding and seeing that pay.
Hmm.
But to look back and be like 16 months, and I remember taking like 40, 50 coffee meetings a month sometimes and starting my workday at 5 o'clock at night, going to bed at like 9 o'clock, waking up at 11 o'clock, 2 hours later, and all these things, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it. I know I've worked harder than I ever have, but it doesn't feel like work. And
It's
so,
yours.
yeah. But when I look back and I'm like, did I really learn how to build a business from live streaming on Twitch? And then I look back and I'm like, well, Facebook says so because anytime the word insurance comes up, you're tagged 25 to 30 times. You built
Mm-hmm.
a private Facebook group, and you have your agency has self-generation, and so you're getting out there and you're supporting small and local businesses and other entrepreneurs. You're building this safe space, kind of like you did for the art stuff, and now it's just for business owners. And so when I look back, I'm like, wow, I really do have 6 employees. I really do have an agency that markets and services itself. We just recently got a placing for top 3 in our city for insurance. We're the
Wow.
very first independent agency to actually win. We have a call center for USAA right here, and then American National. And then looking at the trajectory of the last 10 years, there's never been a single agency that's been mentioned. It's always just been the company, the parent company. So for us to be able to be mentioned with that, somebody also turned around and said, yeah, USA spent $100 million in marketing. Obviously, they're on a national level. And I
Mm-hmm.
look back and I'm like, we spent $160 on Facebook credits learning the algorithm and how to do
Mm-hmm.
that. And so when I really stopped to pause to think that what we've built, um, to think that I was that guy with the potatoes, the guy who felt so unpurposed, the guy who was shutting down the blinds and didn't want to talk to people because they were too happy, to now people saying, hey, you need to talk to Patrick. He's the guy who's going to help your business go next level. I want you to meet Patrick, or Patrick, I wanted to introduce you to so and so. And it's a weekly occurrence, right? I mean, probably 4, 5 people a week are basically saying, hey, this is a new connection that I think that will benefit from knowing you. And I sit back and I'm like, man, this life is so different. And I look and I'm sitting there thinking, like, it's not the same person whatsoever. It's a complete 180. And on one end, I'm like, when is the shoe going to drop again? Because I'm not accustomed to this success. But also at the same time, I think about it and I'm like, all of those things prepped you for this moment.
It's incredible to hear your story of where you are today, having such a successful insurance agency, and how it was sort of born from that creative journey that you went through with Twitch. I wasn't surprised you said Twitch. I saw the gamer headset and the gamer chair that you're sitting in right now, so I kind of was like, "Oh, this guy's a gamer. I get it." And it's incredible, and just to see the momentum. We talked about momentum earlier, about it sort of spiraling and snowballing in one direction, right? So now it's spiraling and snowballing in the other direction, which is phenomenal to see. Wins, singles and doubles, that rounds the bases, right? And nickels make quarters. I mean, it takes time, it's steps. And I think that's a great lesson for people who are listening to understand that sometimes there's no silver bullet, right? But there's silver buckshot, right? So that, you can,
I like that.
it's really, yeah. I heard that the other day, so I stole it. You can take it with you too. But it takes time, and it takes consistently, even like you said, man, you fake it till you make it. And that just, it all starts with mindset. And I heard you talking before. I can tell that you've filled your ears with, I'm sure, some of the thought leaders out there, like the Tony Robbins and the Joe Dispenzas of the world, to try to help make that turn, and feed your head with good quality content. Is that fair to say, that you started absorbing different things?
Absolutely. One of the first things that was recommended when I first got into business was a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Great book.
And it's an amazing book. It's a bit outdated for my taste, to be honest with you. I mean, it talks about Merrill Lynch as a person, right? However, that is one of the few books that I can read over and over, and I'm going to pick up something different every single time. Seems to find the things that I definitely am going through. Started definitely reading way more than I ever have. Another book that was really influential for me was called Tribe of Millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of that thought process. And I think the book is actually the one that kind of promoted that, if you have 6 people in the room, 5 of them are millionaires, then there should be 6 millionaires,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that we're at the average sum of the people that we hang out with. So, I've been on this journey of trying to read at least one book a month. I know for some people they can read a book in a week and things like that. I'm a bit slower. Just, another book that has really been speaking lots of volumes, that's a little bit more modern, is called The Buddha and the Badass. Just so many different great things. I've actually been able to implement a lot of things for my business. So I actually pay my employees a couple of hours per month to go and seek their passions, so that way they can feel rested, so that way they know that I'm vested into them as people and that I want to support them. So just little things like that. It's great for business owners. It's great for people who are trying to improve their mindset. And I really went one step further than just kind of listening, reading, and seeking out some of the stuff I've done and invested into personal coaching for myself. My business partner and I, we have actually launched our own coaching business as well. So he does a lot of kind of the catalyst and life coaching, me having the experience of doing it and building a business real time, strictly from social media, so now we're getting our own clientele from that aspect. We do weekly lives and kind of like a live podcast. And then we also are revamping a podcast for the business. And so we're waiting till we have 5 official guests before we start releasing the episodes. But we're basically, our inner circle, or the first couple of guests that we've had, are people who have been coaches for Tony Robbins, people who are in the inner circle for Grant Cardone. I think we got one guy who's the VP of operations for Grant Cardone, another guy who's been featured all through Wall Street, CNN, NBC. He's written 5 books, so the credibility piece of being able to share my story and ask people if that's something that they would want to share, their stories. And so our reach within the first 3 guests is over 25 million with their platforms,
Their network. Yeah. It's
yes.
amazing.
And yeah, so to basically realize that, like, we're one person from being to all of these prolific people, and their stories matter just as much. But to realize that, like, man, we have professional athletes who are going to be coming on. We've got some people who are building like some mega businesses. I think we've got one guy who has 350 properties in Hawaii, so his net worth is almost like $1.2 billion or something like that. And for these people to say, yes, I want to jump on. So it's really incredible to kind of see the momentum that we're riding right now. And for me, what the best part for me is that I'm able to bring other people with me. It's not just myself. There's an old African proverb that we talk about, and I think it says, alone you can go fast, but together you can go far. And so building all of our businesses, building our reputations, building our relationships off of this collaboration over competition mentality allows us to not only bring other people with us, but again, what value can we bring? Where can we support other people in their dreams, in their journeys? Can we give them the tools so that way they can build their own platform and feel comfortable? And that's really been the best part about this entrepreneurship. The money is definitely nice, but for me, money is just another vessel to allow me to do the things that I want to do. So I tell people all the time, if you're a jerk, you're just going to be a bigger jerk with more money.
True.
Whereas if you're somebody who's maybe very giving, you'll be able to give in much more. And so, it's kind of those little things and those nuggets and the coaching pieces that we learn from everybody. And then, of course, our philosophy is very different. One, we get to duo coach, right? So it's that collaboration piece. So people get two coaches for the price of one. And then our approach is what we call an ILT method, which stands for Invest, Learn, Teach. And that basically is the goal is that we don't want you to work with us forever. We want you to work with us long enough so that way you feel sufficient. You are a master of your own story, and then you're able to go on and teach that to other people. So it's basically teaching other people how to be coaches themselves, and then it continues to spread like wildfire.
It's just incredible to think that, at the beginning of this podcast, 45 minutes ago, you were talking about laying in a bathtub with a knife, and now here you are coaching people. It's just such an incredible journey. And I'm in awe of you and all that you've accomplished and are going to continue to accomplish, and the people that you're surrounding yourself with, and really the benevolence that you're putting out there. Right. And I think that's super, super important to see that you're at that point where you're so fulfilled inside that your cup is so full, you are now able to give in a way that you are to everybody else. And you read a poem in the beginning that talked about, your pain and where you were, and you referenced that you had another poem for where you stand today. Now, before you read it, you said something called slam poetry and hip hop. So I happen to be a big hip hop fan. So, if you can rap this, that would be sweet. Maybe this isn't a rappable one, and I can beatbox for you. But no. But in all seriousness, I would love to hear the poem for sure. I think I'm anxious to hear it.
Unfortunately, this one is a complete opposite of really kind of a slam per se. I can do maybe some of one. So I'm in a big clubhouse group now that's doing some big things called Rap is Poetry. The original guy who started it was actually been a rapper, been on tour, traveling for a number of years, but always really felt like he was limited in his verses. So now realizing that there are other people out there like him who love hip hop, who love writing, but may want to focus more on the poetry versus the hip hop stuff. So I do have stuff for that. I can definitely share a quick one.
I'd
For
love a quick
something like
one.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We'll end with that.
Okay.
But let's hear this. I have a couple quick questions for you, and then we'll end with some slam poetry because I know there are others who want to hear it. I'm dying to hear it.
Yeah. So I can just do just a couple of verses or drops from that one, and then that other one that I talked about kind of where we're at now. I can close with that one.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. So I used to wonder what goes into being chosen. Those who oppose the appointed shogun end up like the poisoned potion Roman. Take notice, even golden Moses was broken. Devotion comes from explosion of emotions. It's the corrosion of a broken heart waiting to be open. The moment you notice, you take ibuprofen. You can't let it go because you're frozen. Your spirit woken sickness in your abdomen like lymphoma jumped into the cab that you're sitting in. Thrown like a glaucoma aroma smelling constituent. You wonder what it's like to be chosen? It's writing after Poe, Eminem, and Robert Frost. It's being German talking about the Holocaust, knowing that you're gonna die carrying your own cross. It's paying taxes after inflation, knowing what it's gonna cost.
That's freaking awesome, dude. I love it. I love
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
I love it. All right. So last two questions, and we'll end with your poem where you are today, your poetry where you are today. So how do people find you? Yeah, how do people find your business? How do they connect with you? Your podcast, all of that that's coming. Where do we get in contact with you?
Yeah, so our website's actually being revamped. So right now our business is just on Facebook. So it's just facebook.com/Main Street Patrick. Kind of talks a little bit about our why. We follow kind of like this 80-20 rule where 80% of it is really just about getting to know our heart, our agency, our heart story. We're one of the most diverse agencies that I've ever come across, so less than 2% of the people in the financial world, specifically for insurance, are in insurance, even fewer agency owners. We've got a military spouse, we've got a veteran, we've got an older adult, a guy from the LGBT community. So we kind of hit almost quite a few marks. So that's that. The other one that with the podcast, being able to check us out on all the stuff, Instagram, Facebook, it's Two Native Sons. So it's the number two, then Native Sons. So that's where you can find us for the coaching. You can find us for the podcast that we'll be launching. We have merchandise that's on Instagram as well. And on Clubhouse, you can find me. And I think it's just my name at Patrick Murakami. And really, I mean, if not too many Patrick Murakamis in the world, so you could really find me on every platform. I'm really specializing and focusing solely on kind of Instagram, Clubhouse, and Facebook at this time. But yeah, those are kind of all the different plugs.
Awesome. Yeah. And for those who are listening, we'll have all of those links in the show notes. We'll have it on his website page on our site for the podcast. So you'll definitely be able to connect with Patrick on all his different ventures that he has going on. So last question before the poem. You talked about an incredible amount of information today, and you dropped pearls of wisdom throughout the entire conversation. And in this hour, a lot was covered. With all that said, if someone was to walk away from this conversation with just one thing, they remembered one thing from what you said, or maybe it's something you didn't say, but you should have said or wanted to say, what would that pearl, what would that nugget be that they could take with them to improve their life, on their journey becoming the best version of who they are?
I would say that learning to love yourself, give yourself grace, right, are super important pieces that I was never taught. Again, coming from that broken home, broken family, that unpurposedness, a lot of that has changed because I've taken that time to invest into myself and my journey. Like I said, I paid for coaching, and that was an investment into my mindset, right? I used the kind of the PlayStation 5 memes as a thing, right? Because they talk about like securing the PS5 and kind of maybe doing some things that are like questionable. And I know the meme community is it's for laughs and giggles, but my thought process is like, man, if you invested the same price it would cost to buy a PS5, I could easily teach you how to go ahead and secure that, right? I have It's the abundance mindset. It's that growth mindset that allows me to think outside the box and thrive. It allows me to collaborate. It allows me to teach business owners, how to go from just one source of income in their business to 15, right? And now they don't have to do much outside of what they're doing, but now they can earn additional sources of income or generate that passive income, So just being able to understand that like you have all the tools, life has given you all the things, and if you don't feel like that you have it, there are people out there that can help you unlock that inner potential. So if you are on the verge or on the cusp of like, man, I think that I could do this, I could do this better, I can improve the process, you probably can. It's just a matter of getting into that mindset to be able to take that leap of faith. And I think that self-love and that abundance piece that we talked about, giving yourself grace, is going to help.
Nothing to comment on that. That's absolutely perfect. All right, hit us with your poem.
All right.
This is where you are at now. Obviously, expect a sharp contrast from the first poem.
Yes. Mesmerizing, mind-bending, magic-making, the artistic contraception of poetry. I dare to conceptualize harmony. I dare to visualize artistry. I dare to build a community. I dare to negate negativity with positivity. And I dare you to do the same. I dare you, Derek, to be the integer. A natural wonder, a natural thunder, shake things up. I dare you to not take a picture of discontent in your heart, but instead juxtapose, strike a pose, impose your will like ancient pharaohs and surprise people. Dare to be different. Dare to love unconditionally. Dare to put out your very best, but your very worst. And dare your past to be proud of its future. I dare myself to fall in love with me, and I dare you to do the same. I'm daring myself to believe. I dare, I dare, I dare, because I care. I dare you.
Amazing. I love it.
Thank you so much for just the opportunity to be here. This has been an incredible time well spent for me as well.
Likewise. Thanks so much for coming on. We look forward to having you back again, Patrick. You absolutely crushed it. Such great content in this. And I wish you the best of success as you continue to dare and to move on.
Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Adapt You podcast today. Our goal with this show and all of our content is to deliver you the guests and the respective knowledge necessary to help you change something in your life. Everyone who listens to this show has something they want to affect and something they want to change. And our goal is to help give you the knowledge necessary to take you down that path on becoming the absolute best version of yourself. If you like what you heard today, please tune in to all of our shows and also check us out in social media. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and check out our website and have some great content on there as well. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next show.